Hi, I'm Justin Mormon.
And I'm Katie Thornton, and this is the Re-Education of Schools podcast,
where we have open, honest conversations about how to better understand social-emotional learning, trauma-informed care, the whys behind student behavior, and how to help kids navigate it all as they go through school and life. All right, welcome back to our next episode. We actually have Colin Seale, talking equity, critical thinking, and more with us here today. Hey, right before we get started and jump in too much, if you are listening to this, if you have found this podcast, whether it's just this episode or whether it is the whole podcast as a whole helpful, man, one of the things you can absolutely do that would really be helpful to us is leave a review. 5 stars, obviously preferable. I guess we'll take it. If it's less than that, we're all about honest feedback. But if you could leave a review, that's really helpful. It just helps keep the conversation going, helps get the conversation out there to other people. And today's conversation especially is going to be one that you're going to want to have out with other people so that you can discuss it more, I'm sure. Colin Seale, again, talking equity, critical thinking, and more with us. Katie always does our intros, Colin, and so we're going to let her kind of jump into that. And you can correct all the mistakes she makes in your bio, or you can pretend like you're better than you even are compared to what she says. So it's up to you.
Here we go. So here, I'm super excited. And I should say, Colin's our first guest of 2025. You are definitely one of the benchmark guests that I wanted to have come on first. So you were on the top of the list for this year. So thank you for joining us. Colin Seale wears many hats, but all of them support an embetterment of educational outcomes. At the heart of Colin's work is his role as an educator, with this being the focus of his advocacy for change. During his time teaching, Colin graduated from law school. His experience teaching, expertise in law, and heart for advocacy have led to the creation of thinkLaw that supports equitable educational opportunities and challenges educators everywhere for students to be critical thinkers. Colin's best-selling books, Tangible Equity and Think Like a Lawyer, his second edition of Think Like a Lawyer is coming out, so be on the lookout for that, have given educators the tools and strategies to serve this work in their classroom. If you haven't heard Colin speak before, you are in for a treat. His energy is contagious, and his genuineness is evident as he shares his personal journey that has led him down this path. Welcome, Colin Seale, to the podcast. It's an honor to share your work today.
Thank you. Excited to be here and share with you guys.
Yeah. How did I do? Was that pretty accurate?
Perfect.
Okay, good.
That was perfect.
Do you think you're better than that, or do you think you're worse than that?
No,
I'm just kidding. You don't have to answer that.
You know, it's interesting. It's interesting because I feel like nowadays when I'm going to speak and give a keynote at some place, I'm like, you know what I would love for you to say in the bio? Colin is a guy that does a thing.
Yeah.
And keep the expectations low, keep the bar low, because it's always better to like over deliver than it is to over promise, right? But it's all good. I'll take it.
We just found this guy. We don't know if he's got anything to say.
Exactly. That's what I'm talking about. I
wouldn't get too excited. So here he is, though. And we'll see what happens from there. Well, we're going to jump in. We try to not go too long. We want to make sure that people stay engaged and can use this hopefully in professional developments and things like that.
Absolutely.
For after-school staff meetings and things like that, if they can. So I'm going to jump in, Colin. Obviously, you can take these questions whatever way you want to, but we're excited to hear what your feedback is and what you have to say to us today. So one of the many things that we really love about your work is just the genuine care of improving educational outcomes for others. Can you just share maybe just a little bit about your story and why this work is so personal for you?
Oh, for sure. And I want to add before I even get into that, that one of the things that we're doing a lot, particularly with our school administrators, is we actually ask you to think about your origin story, right? Like Spider-Man got bit by a radioactive spider, and that's where it all came from, right? But usually we all have some version of that, and sometimes we're too quiet about it. If we actually take the time to think about these moments, that your equity superhero journey, the moment where you realize that transformational change in education was super important, like it's really just important to note that. So even if you think about your whole staff, your whole team, your whole colleagues, all of them doing this activity, it can be helpful. For me, it really came down to this idea that when I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, I was a kid that was the kind of kid we don't serve very well in our school system. I was on free and reduced lunch. I'm the first generation of my family born in this country. My dad was incarcerated for a decade for selling drugs. And I had this really like dynamic moment where I was getting in trouble in school all the time, but I also had a really bad speech impediment. And as I'm getting evaluated for speech services, it turned out I was supposed to be in a gifted and talented program since I was in kindergarten. It turned out a lot of my behavior challenges came from a lack of being challenged. And if you're listening, I know you know that kid. I know you teach that kid, you know that kid is in your building. But my whole thing is, I wish it didn't come down to luck. I wish it didn't come down to this idea that my feeling in my life has always felt like I'm an exception to the rule. So ever since then, it's all been about how do we actually fix this rule? How do we actually challenge this rule that says that who kids are and where they're born from will determine their outcomes? And I say this to folks because look, yeah, we do a lot of work in very diverse areas, but the reality is, even in districts where we do the work and 98% of the population is like white kids, guess what? You can still look at those kids and based on academic outcomes, predict what neighborhood they live in, predict what kind of income their parents make. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to end those predictions. We're trying to create a space where it's no longer so common that demographics determine outcomes. And that's the why. I don't like the fact that for me it was luck. And I want to really help school systems create systems where this becomes predictable way to be unpredictable.
Yeah, I was going to say, Colin, we found a lot of our work we do with kids with behavioral mental health. The assumption is they can't do academics, right? That they should be in the separate program. They have academic issues. I think what we have found time and time again, a lot of these kids are gifted and talented. We see that over and over again, really high academic performance. So I think your story and your work really resonates with a lot of the work that we're doing, that we just don't have the same expectations. We just want to keep peace. As long as they're quiet and behaved and they can go to that classroom, then we're fine with it. And what really needs to happen is that we should expect educational growth from all students all the time and set those bars and standards the same. So that message really has resonated with me a lot for you, hearing you talk through that for sure.
And to gotta be honest about the practicalities that we're dealing with here, right? Like I was talking to school leader earlier today who if you just look at what she's dealing with, I mean, it's a lot. She has multiple autism classrooms on her campus. She has a lot of kids that have disrupted education because they came from a Central American country where they went maybe forget about being behind. Missing school for 2 years or more is a lot for an elementary school age kid. So there's this feeling of like, okay, I'm looking at the level of rigor kids are supposed to be at, and I'm saying to myself out loud, these kids can't. But at thinkLaw, a lot of our approach has been we want to really embrace teachers to understand that when you say these kids can't, that's not what you actually mean. What you actually mean is at this current moment, you can't. Like I can't. I don't know how to create learning conditions where all kids can. So this isn't really an issue of mindset. It's a skill set issue. And we can actually create and build a lot of the skills that it takes to connect kids, even struggling learners, to high degrees of rigor. Because it turns out that high degree of rigor is often the thing that latches them in. It hooks them in. It gets them going. It gets them excited about school. And every classroom can therefore look and feel like a gifted and talented learning experience.
Yeah, looking at those tier one learning environments, and I love you have some great visuals that pair with that. But getting kids hooked, you talk a lot about getting kids hooked into learning, and that's 100%. Kids are excited when you have them hooked in, you get them into bigger project based learning and some critical thinking. That's what they come home and talk about. They don't talk about the page 32 out of the math book. It's that hook and that bigger ideas that they're excited to share with their families or come home and talk about for sure.
Yeah, and I think one of the things even that you just said that I love, Colin, is this idea that it's not like a fake look, right? We have to take a real look at where people are and what their reality is, and I think sometimes that is the turnoff to people in education is that they feel like there are people who are maybe just trying to sell them something or something like that, who are like, hey, if you just do this, everything will be fine, and all these various problems, that you're up against and challenges you're up against are maybe going to go away. And I think it's that honest look to be able to be like, yeah, these are the realities, and I can't necessarily change those realities, but what do I do with that?
And I think a lot of times, think about the revolution in education, right? Everyone needs to reimagine this and redo this. But like my whole thing is any revolution we're going to have in education has got to be practical. It's got to be sustainable. And that's why, Katie, you mentioned a little bit about how we know how kids respond to something like project-based learning. We know that. And I also know that straight up, real deal, hardcore project-based learning is really unsustainable work. It's very, very hard to do it
Yeah.
as a system. Problem-based learning I could do every day though can actually learning to a good
Yes.
problem every
Yes.
single day. So that feels a lot more
Yes.
sustainable. And that's the world
Yes.
we're going to be in. I have a section in Thinking Like a Lawyer about classroom management. And I actually just did a workshop with this with principals and assistant principals in Michigan just the other day. And I admitted something that I don't really share very often, but I just want to make it clear. When it came to my classroom, teaching math, middle school, high school math in Washington, D.C. and Las Vegas, I never actually had groups of more than 2 kids. Maybe the odd group out would have 3, but I did 2 kids because it got out of control for me when I had more than 2 kids. And teachers looked at me like, well, wait a minute. Is that okay? I'm like, sure, it's okay. Right? At least they're starting to collaborate and work on one other person. And if it's too much for you to handle, if you got kids that are a little bit more rambunctious than others, then like, why are you setting yourself up for failure? Take the easy button. Like, don't have to
Yeah.
overcomplicate everything. So I'm like, okay, problem-based learning, groups of 2. Like, I don't have to make things super complicated. A turn and talk for me, the way my ADHD is set up, is much better than people getting up, moving chairs, and all that stuff. I can't handle that. And I'd rather keep it simple. Right. So this is what it comes down to, like really embracing teachers in terms of what realistic capacity do you have to create unrealistic outcomes. And when I say unrealistic outcomes, I want to be really clear. No teacher ever goes to school and goes to work and decides one day, I hereby declare that I have low expectations for children. No one ever says that. No one ever does that. What we do is we say, well, I'm just being realistic. I look at the data. I look at what's going on the years before. I'm just being realistic. To do the transformational work, though, that has to be done for our kids, we have to be strategically unrealistic. We have to set goals that don't actually make any sense on paper, goals that don't even seem attainable. Forget being realistic. I've got to be unrealistic on purpose, unrealistic with a purpose. And our whole thing is how do we set you up with as many practical tools as possible to make that unrealistic goal actually happen?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a freedom with that, right? That you're kind of talking about that it seems like you experienced even where you didn't feel like putting words in your mouth. I think there's a lot of times that teachers don't feel like they have the freedom to make those kinds of adjustments that you just were talking about that you've made and that you encourage other people to make. And I think that's such a key that you're spreading that message, right? You have to be able to have the freedom, give yourself that permission to maybe do it in a way that you haven't done it before. Maybe that you didn't do it last year, but maybe this year it has to look this other way. And maybe next year it'll have to look a completely different way than it's looked this year to make you be able to do what you're wanting to do. And I think there's a freedom in that, but I think it's also that's scary sometimes for teachers is what I found is like that idea of doing something different than what they've done before or feeling like they have to do it a certain way.
I think there's a feeling though where people, when I talk about the unrealistic piece of it, I think it really does fit with the times that we're in right now. I think that since the pandemic, almost every district I know has purchased some level of new math curriculum, of a new ELA curriculum, with science and reading, all that stuff. Like we know that there's been new adoptions, right? And we know that sometimes those adoptions, I look at some of those questions and I'm like, ain't no way. Ain't no way my kids can do this. This is crazy. This is levels harder than what I used to see before. So there's a level of just looking at it and you know it feels like Mission Impossible. But that's the hint. When it feels like Mission Impossible, that's the hint that it's probably the right mission. Probably the right mission. Then it comes down to,
Yeah.
okay, well, what do I need to do? And when I say this, when I say it's personal, I'm like, look, like I graduated top of my class in law school. When I went to Syracuse and I majored in computer science, I was student body president. And if you actually think about it, all of that is the definition of unrealistic for a kid that grew up where I grew up and how I grew up. Right. So, like, I think that there's enough receipts we have in this world where unrealistic becomes possible because of the intervention of adults who care. Adults that do not let
Yeah.
kids leave their brilliance on the table. Are we willing to be that adult? Can we step up and actually do that? And I think that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah. No, that's so good. Were you going to say something?
Oh, no, I was just saying, I think kind of leads into our next question because
Yeah,
I want to
go
ask
for
a
it.
little bit about, okay, so I want you to share with a little bit with the listeners about tangible equity and what you mean when we say that. I also want to see as we talk through this, it reminds me a lot of like the warm demander we hear a lot about. Can you talk a little bit about tangible equity and then maybe how the warm demander, which I think is becoming a popular educational phrase, right? How those tie together and pair together about expectations for kids.
So, like, first of all, tangible equity was written because I just really got sick of the word equity being used as this kind of throwaway buzzword to the point where we don't even really know what we're even talking about, right? So when I'm talking about equity work, I'm actually
Yes.
specifically naming the things that we do that reduces the predictive power that demographics have on outcomes. Like we're disrupting those patterns if we're doing equity work. We're truly, I don't even care if you're in the district or people don't like the word equity, because it's really about the work, not the word. When I think about the work, I just wrote a piece about this. I just wrote a piece about the collective power of moving in silence. And I say this because in Ohio, in Michigan, these are places where you actually have a disproportionate number of Underground Railroad stops. These were regular people who risked life and limb to connect people to freedom. You know what they did not have, though? TikTok account. They did not share these things on IG stories. They just did it in silence because they had to. And they realized that the work is what really mattered. The outcome was what really mattered. Right? Like, and you start thinking about this, you're like, okay, right now in education, what we tend to do and when we care about equity is we just get really loud about it. We get really, 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 really loud about it. Like my daughter's school has Black Lives Matter painted in the parking lot. Great, right? But if I actually look at the outcomes for Black children in that school, I scratch my head because I'm like, well, they're not achieving at the same level of all these other people. So like, I don't really care what you have in this performative sense. What's actually happening in terms of the actual work? When I'm thinking about the work, we talked earlier about like gifted behaviors and how sometimes that can look a little bit different. I know a woman in North Texas, and I talk about this in the article that I wrote at the beginning of every year when she was doing assessments. She would ask the kindergarten, first grade teachers, like, hey, send me the list of all the kids that you think should be assessed further for gifted and talented. It'll always be certain kinds of kids, right? The well-behaved, goody-goody, certain kind of kids. And also, send me the list of the kids that you think need like behavioral support, might need referrals to special ed, people that you know just getting your last nerve, and you get that list too. And she used to screen those exact same lists of kids for gifted and talented services. And by doing that, she actually transformed the number of Black and brown kids that were identified gifted in her district. She didn't say nothing to them though, right? It wasn't some big policy, wasn't some big meeting, wasn't some big thing with all these kind of bells and whistles on it. It was like, I'm doing the work that's going to disrupt the patterns that we know need disrupting. If we're really doing the work, we should focus more on doing that work instead of just like talking about it. And I always kind of use the analogy. I started the article out with the analogy of like, anyone that has little kids, knows that like when they're in a room and you hear a lot of crashing and banging, you're a little bit concerned. But when do you get really concerned? Silence. When they're silent, you know there's some trouble happening. So my whole thing is, what if we learned from them? What if we did a little bit of that? What if we thought about, you know what? Right now we're in interesting political times. And I would argue that most of the things we're gonna have to be doing in the next few years that we know are gonna really move the needle for kids, we're gonna just have to do the work. Just do it. I'm not asking for permission or forgiveness. I'm just doing the work. And I'm not going to create a parade around it. I'm not going to put everything out on Instagram. I'm just going to do it because I know it needs to be done. And I argue that the most important equity work we have ever seen in education will be the stuff we've never heard about and never will.
Yeah. I listen, I love that. I was told at one point years ago in my career when I was trying to get something going with a certain student, it was a story for a different time, but a supervisor high up in our organization looked at me and said, well, that doesn't really read great as a headline. And I said, I don't really need it to read great as a headline. I need it to work for this kid. Like I actually need it to work for them. And so I love how you phrased all of that. That was such a good way of describing it. And I don't know, it just really resonated with me. I think that's really good.
And the tangible part of it, I just want to name that too, is like we're not talking about something that I need 18 layers of approval on, right? A lot of it comes to the fact that we already have power. A classroom teacher already has power. School administrator already has power. What are we doing with the power that we already have, right? And I think that's where it comes down to like, okay, like there's no cavalry coming to save me. There's no Green Beret unit coming in. Like it's gonna be me. It's gonna be us. It's gonna be our team. And that's where that level of efficacy really starts to understand like, okay, like we've got this. And in fact, you're the only possible hope. It's only going to be you.
Yeah, we were just talking about that the other day. Like, if you are waiting for somebody to come in and save you and give you permission and tell you how to do it, you're going to retire because it's never going to happen, right? Like, your team, I think people are just always quick to look for permission. And I think part of a school administration that we need to look at is empowering teachers to trust them to make decisions and do what's right for kids, and putting that on the forefront, that this is the work that they will have to start in their classrooms, and we have to support them on it.
Right? Whenever I hear things, right, and I think maybe it's the lawyer in me, right? Like I get really
Yeah.
attached to certain words and certain phrases,
Yeah.
but I do think it's important that we attach definitions to things, or else things can get all over the place, right? So
Yeah.
even what you just said, Katie, the idea of like doing what's right for kids. I think that there's a lot of educators in this world that have a lot of different understandings of what that could mean to do right for
Yeah.
kids. So sometimes what I suggest to say is let's be specific about what we're saying. Do what's best for kids to achieve academically at a high level. Do what's best for kids to feel safe and secure in school. Do what's best for kids to make sure that they're like growing up as like whole humans with social emotional support. So name what it is so we can be really clear about like what that work would entail. Because I think and sometimes like we're not being helpful enough to folks if we're not actually being laser focused on what the actual outcome is that we're trying to get to.
Do you find this isn't a question we sent you? Do you find that that kind of generic usage of words that Katie egregiously just used? No. Do you find that that kind of being generic like that lends itself? Do you find that lends itself to like sounding good for a lot of districts? You're out there all over the United States, but
Yeah.
then do you think that leads to a lack of knowing what to do for teachers?
So, what's wild? One of my favorite songs from the 90s, right? And I think the song still gets the party started all the time. Is Montel Jordan, This Is How We Do It, right? You
Yes.
put that song on anywhere, people are going to go crazy with it. The wildest part is, I think I counted. He says, This Is How We Do It like 72 times, but he never actually explains how he does it. It's never
Yeah.
actually explained, right? I'm just saying it over and over again. This is how we do it. But I'm like, okay, but how do you actually do it? Right. Like, and I think there's a
Yeah.
level of like, there's a breakdown. There's a breakdown where it's like, okay, like we talk about certain things, right? Here's an example of the breakdown. Classroom management. Classroom management. My class is out of control. Classroom management. I have all these classroom management issues. When you start actually listening to people that talk about classroom management, and you quickly start to realize, hey, I don't think you want classroom management. Really? Like, no, I think you want classroom control. And that's a different goal. And it turns out that for a lot of kids, if you try to control them, they resist. So what you're actually facing isn't necessarily straight up discipline issues. You're facing a resistance. And what might happen if instead of controlling the classroom, your goal was to actually manage a classroom, which means your goal is not to really change the kids and who they are. You're trying to leverage the energy and personalities that they bring in so you can create a classroom experience that maximizes learning outcomes for all kids. So at that level of specificity, at that level of clarity, people start to kind of shift what they think they need because what I say isn't always what I mean. And to your point, Joshua, like I think when people say to do what's best for kids, it's like relationships. Like, oh, it's all about relationships. I'm like, oh, that's helpful. That's real helpful. I mean, most people like kids in schools, right? Like that's why I'm doing it.
Yeah.
So, but what we've learned is it's not really about the relationship specifically. When you think about kids who talk about liking their teachers in liked classrooms, what they actually like is they like the way they get constructive feedback from that teacher. They like the way they feel connected to their peers in that classroom. They like the way the teacher connects what's going on to the real world. So it's not necessarily about the relationship, it's about the learning relationship and being very explicit about what that actually entails. And I think that level of specificity is so much more helpful because now I know a little bit better about like what I'm actually trying to do. It doesn't feel so pie in the sky.
Yeah, that was you jumped to what my follow-up question was going to be because when you're talking about being specific that and then the lack of definition, that's where I was going with that. Is like the hot topic, right? To be able to say is, well, you need to build a relationship with that kid. But I think that infuriates people because like you said, people are trying to build relationships with the students in their room, and to be more specific about what that means or what that looks like, in what way does that student need that relationship? I think that makes such a big difference, but I think it seems like at times we stop at just saying build a relationship because that's like,
Right.
again, that's the hot thing to say. It's the hot thing to say right now.
Sometimes I see schools take that to a level where it does become very specific. I know a school in LA called Larchmont Charter School, and they do something really, really, it blew my mind. They do an inventory of the entire school. They put every kid's name on a board around the auditorium, and every teacher has to walk around and write down what they know about each and every kid. And it never fails. The kids with almost nothing on their list are the kids that are struggling the most in school. Because nobody has taken the time to be able to know and connect with them at all.
Yeah.
right? So like this is the thing when you look at it, like, all right, like if we're not talking about relationships, if we're talking about like, do my kids have any sense of connection whatsoever, any sense of belonging whatsoever? And if we consider that to be a crucial part of our kids' success, then we can do something more specific about it. But even there, I don't think that's a generic statement. That's like we're putting some quantitative analysis around it. We're being really, really clear about what it is we're trying to do here, so that no kid ends up on that list where nobody has anything written about them.
Yeah, that's
What a
such an
great
interesting idea.
idea.
Yeah, it is a really good one.
Stealing. That's a good
Yeah.
one.
I mean, that's
I
the
know what
coolest part
Katie's doing
about
next
doing the
year.
work I do all over the nation. It's like, you know how hard it is to even get out of your own classroom when you're in a school, or to get out of your own building if you're a school leader, or get out of your own district if you're a district leader. Like, so being able to actually see these things play out all over is just, it's an incredible gift that I love being able to share with the
Yeah.
40 plus states of people that we work with.
Okay, so my idea for your third book is putting all the strategies and like things you've seen and noticed like in your third book. I think that's the book for the next
Yeah.
time.
Yeah,
I love that.
Katie's ready to ghost write it with you. Like
Yeah,
she'll,
whatever.
and then I'm old news, I guess.
Yeah.
Hey, so we talk a lot about empathy on the podcast in general, and I'd be curious to hear some of your thoughts on emotional versus intellectual empathy.
So this is very interesting because I think, again, in the times that we are in, things have gotten kind of weird, right? Where people are afraid of SEL. SEL seems scary to people, right? And my whole thing is like, it's always been a big part of our civic responsibility in education to prepare young people to grow up in the world and not be jerks.
Yeah.
Really always been a part of what we've been trying to do. And my whole thing, if I look at it, like whether I call it, intellectual empathy or emotional empathy, right? Like intellectual empathy is more like sympathy, right? More like I could understand and kind of see like, man, that must suck. Like that must hurt. That must be really, really tough, right? And then the emotional empathy is like, I'm actually crying right with you. I actually feel like that happened to me. Like there are some people you could be so close to that it feels like it can happen to you. And like a lot of teachers, I would argue, probably have a fair degree of emotional empathy, which becomes scary sometimes because sometimes our kids come in with a lot of trauma. And then you end up having all the secondary trauma because like you're living this as if you were them. And it's really, really hard to be able to balance that. But either part of that spectrum, from intellectual to emotional, is caring at the forefront. Okay. And my whole thing is we should care. We ought to care. But again, how do I think about this so it's not one more thing? I don't want to be a math teacher thinking about, okay, kids, come gather around. It's SEL time. I don't have to do all of that, right? It turns out I can create opportunities for empathy simply by having kids understanding multiple perspectives. These two math problems are both done incorrectly. Which wrong is more right? The simple act of considering what somebody else might have done to get to that level of error is creating a space where I'm able to put myself in the shoes of somebody who is not me. And the more I get practice doing that, the greater this is for like my development as a critical thinker, even as early as like pre-K kindergarten, right? Three blind mice, see how they run, see how they run. They all ran after the farmer's wife. She cut off their tails with a carving knife. Have you ever heard a story in your life like Three Blind Mice? And I ask you the question, what's hard about being a blind mouse? And kindergartners can be like, well, it's probably hard because it's harder to get to the cheese and you're probably getting, more susceptible to getting eaten up by a cat or something like that. Okay, well, why do you think the mice are running after the farmer's wife? Well, maybe to scare her, but if I want to think about alternative reasons, maybe she smells like cheese. It's not always about you, lady. Get over yourself. So now I've got my kids really starting to formulate these ideas and alternative viewpoints and put themselves in the shoes of someone that's not them. And if I'm doing that early and often, if I'm doing that when I'm looking at different characters in a novel, when I'm doing that looking at different ways a science experiment could be considered, was Alexander the Great really all that great? And I'm considering for different stakeholders. Like now I'm in a space where I'm learning as part of my core content, as part of my tier one instruction, also how to be a more considerate person, how to be more empathetic about how others might be impacted by the actions of others, and inevitably my own actions, which is why we firmly believe that a part of our curriculum has to be that doing right is more important than being right. Because we can't just be
Yeah.
in a space where it's like kids never understand that nuance of just because I can doesn't mean that I should. Just because I can doesn't mean that I should. Imagine every kid in America had that lesson. Imagine every adult grew up knowing that their whole lives. Just because I can't doesn't mean that I should.
Yeah, that's really good. What do you think teachers do? And you've clearly you're around a lot. You recognize and you're interacting with all these educators, and it is a lot. You have students coming in that are carrying heavy loads, like you said, that rubs off on us with that kind of secondary trauma is one way of describing it for sure. What is it that you've found is maybe good advice or good insight for teachers to be able to work with that without getting too overwhelmed or too bogged down themselves?
So this is going to feel a little bit cold hearted, but I don't care.
Yeah, let's hear it. I'm all for it.
My thing is, I think that even for teachers who themselves come from backgrounds that involve a lot of trauma, a lot of challenges, right? We have to understand that, yes, it'll be hard for kids to learn if they haven't eaten and all that kind of stuff. I get all that, right? But we have to come to a point where we start to recognize that in our lives, we actually have pretty stable jobs. We got pretty good benefits. We're pretty secure in what we're doing, right? We have to understand that a lot of what we call trauma, our kids call Tuesday. What we cannot do is traumatize them even further by not giving them access to transformational educational experience because we feel so bad about what they're going through. If anything, they need it even more, right? We talk a lot about like Maslow's and four blooms, and that sounds cute, right? Maslow's hierarchy of needs are more important than Bloom's, except for the fact that for a lot of our kids, Bloom's is their Maslow. This educational thing we got right here is the thing. This is the escape. This is the pathway. And the thing about it
Yeah.
is that like it should never be either or. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. I've seen so many cases where we just take rigor off the table, we take challenge off the table, we take grade level content off the table because of what kids are going through. Not realizing that that could be the haven. There were times when I was in school where I never wanted to leave the building and school was home. I would have to cry if I had to miss school because I was sick, because I did not want to not be a part of that experience. We can create those kinds of realities for kids that are struggling with their own reality. And we can create this place where school becomes not just a haven, but a place where they're there to thrive, not just survive, but literally thrive.
Yeah, I think that's so great. I think there are because it's hard, right? And a lot of, like you mentioned before, a lot of people in education, probably most people in education, maybe everybody in education, I don't know, but a lot of people in education got into it because they care about kids, they want to help kids. And then when you're up looking at your room, you're interacting with the students in your building, whatever it might be, you it is hard. It can be hard to look around and say like, oh, like there's all these needs. And I love what you said because it doesn't that we could feel bad to the point that it takes away all hey, we got to be better for the kids. Like it eliminates that. We've got to still have those expectations. And I think what we see, we were just actually in academic I don't know what we called them. Meetings? What did we do today?
We were at his MTSS academically tiered meeting. We still do that for our special education kids to make sure they're making adequate progress and growth and making sure everyone's achieving, exceeding. So he had his today.
Colin, I'm not what you would call somebody that knows all of the academic language. So
Okay.
What we watched as we looked at like the growth of the students that are in my room right now and that have been in our program, like we watched that there's growth and that there's growth that's maybe more than what should have happened in this amount of time. But that's not because I pulled them in and took them out of general education. It's because we really pushed hard to get them into those rooms and be like, hey, listen, this is what they're doing in the class. Now, does that mean you might need some extra help? Sure. Does it might mean you need some accommodations? Sure. But what we're going to do is we're going to push hard. And we're going to push hard, not to like some breaking point where you're not making it and you're feeling like a failure, but we're going to push hard. That's going to stretch you, and that you're going to have to expect more of yourself. And what you see then is that the kids actually really like so much of what you're saying. They rise to that expectation, and they grow. And it doesn't mean that just in 5 weeks, all of a sudden they're just fine and everything's okay and they're right where they need to be. But it does show them that they can do hard things and that they can keep doing hard things that maybe they didn't think they could do. And now instead of crying when they have to do the science work in, Mr. Whoever's room, they're actually going and asking for help from that very same gen ed teacher being like, hey, I really want to do this, but I'm going to need a little bit of extra help. Can you tell me how to do this other part? It's cool to see the kids rise up to it. But if you don't have those systems and that expectation, like you keep talking about, set in place, if we're just walking around feeling sorry for the kids that we feel like we should feel sorry for, we're not doing them justice at all. That's hard for a lot of people to get to that point, because like you said at the beginning of that whole answer, it can feel cold. Potentially, it can feel like a cold answer, but you can really, really care about kids. And I think, maybe I don't want to put words in your mouth, I feel like arguably it maybe shows that I care about kids less if I don't push them, if I am just sitting around feeling sorry for them. Am I really doing this kid justice? How much do I care about them if I'm not pushing them a little bit more than what they think they should be pushed?
You know, the most eloquent line that the man George W. Bush ever spoke out loud was when he was releasing No Child Left Behind, and he said, "It's time to end the soft bigotry of low expectations." And I was like, "What in the world? What did he just say? The soft bigotry of low expectations?" It's like, that's one of the that kind of encapsulates a lot of what we're talking about right now. I can't believe he said it, right? Because he's not known for kind of putting together like the most like eloquent lines, but like that line right there is one of the biggest challenges we're still trying to face, you know. And you've seen that thing on social media before, like, what are you gonna do? Are you gonna cry about it? Or are you gonna get to work? And it's like, first of all, I'm gonna do both. So we can still do both. We can still feel the feelings. We can still go do
Yeah.
what we need to do, and we have to get to work. We got to make sure that we're giving kids what they need.
Yeah, sometimes I think we overthink, like when we talk a lot about behavior, right? We overthink behavior, but sometimes routine expectations and just allowing them to be like every other kid is, to Justin's point, is sometimes what we have found, making them feel like their typical peers in the classroom environment is some of the best gift we can give when we really love a kid.
Well, yeah, I watch kids all the time who all of a sudden look around and they're like, the expectation is what I see in this general education setting that maybe I haven't been in that much up until this point in my career. But now I'm looking around and understanding what the expectation is, and I rise to that. They don't even need me to come along and say, this is the expectation you need to rise to. Just by being in the place where they really should be, they recognize what the expectation is, and they want to rise to it.
When I look at classroom management versus classroom control, right? It might look like something like this. If you're looking at these kids, you're like, man, I feel like every time I get into my lesson, every time I get 5 minutes into it, kids start talking. And I was like, here's a novel idea. What if you set it up so kids started talking after 5 minutes on purpose?
Yeah.
Because it turns
right?
out I do, you do, we do is not actually a commandment, right? Like I can actually wiggle that up a little bit. I can do it in shorter segments, and I can go back like, all right, let's bring it all back. You know, like I can switch it up. But like you have to understand what you're dealing with. It's part of why I said like I didn't really do a whole lot of groups beyond 2 kids, because I had classes where, you know, I mean, I couldn't see what happens.
Sure.
I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna do it, right? But like that's a part of like understanding who your kids are and what they need to thrive in that moment. So yeah, make it easy on yourself. Figure it out. Like, don't keep on going down the same path and seeing the same errors happen every day. Like, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, what's your, be mindful of time for you as we start kind of closing in on wrapping this up. What's kind of your call to action for educators or districts, maybe even state departments, as in regards to education right now?
I think that when it comes to doing what we're trying to talk about, right? The disruptive pattern of like interrupting the pattern that demographics have on outcomes. I often say it's not just hard work, it's heart work. Right? This is really, really like deeply committed stuff. But on top of that, one of the things that I see a lot is like, I see some people that accept the challenge. I accept the challenge. I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to start using all this critical thinking in my lesson. And then when I start class tomorrow, I got 3 kids that are like, excuse me, Mr. Seale, can I just get the worksheet? And I feel very discouraged and very disheartened. And what I want you to do is don't just accept the challenge, accept that it's going to be challenging. If we're going to do this work, you got to accept the challenge and accept that it's going to be challenging. Accept the challenge and accept that I probably won't get to the whole kind of end of this goal by this actual academic year. It might take me 2 years. It might be a good strategy to have some of these teachers loop with their kids for next year so they can really see that growth. But I got to be able to stick with this, right? Like it can't just be, okay, on to the next thing. Like, no, I have to be able to go through the muck. I had to be able to kind of climb up the mountain and feel that sweat. It's like it's no pain, no gain. So it's got to be this thing of like, I'm accepting a challenge and I'm accepting that it's going to be challenging. I think that a lot of teachers are perfectionists. It's kind of a part of who we attract in this profession. And we don't like failing. And when I say failing, I say we don't like getting anything less than an A. So if we're in a class and I'm like, man, that class is like a C- session just now. we're not good enough with that. For me, I was like, hey, that's passing. I'm good. I could deal with a C minus. I know I could always work on that, but like we gotta be in the mindset where like, yeah, if you get a C minus on a challenging class, that's not too hard to do. That's okay. I can live with that. So accept the challenge and accept that it's going to be challenging. And I think that puts us in the right frame of mind to be able to create transformational, purposely unrealistic outcomes for kids.
Yeah, that's really good. Hey, I am going to wrap it up shortly. I promise. There's one more question that you mentioned something earlier about working with administrators, and I'm just kind of curious to hear your thoughts. It doesn't have to be super long. Why is, or in what way is it important to be able to work with that level in education? Maybe even more so than working with the teachers directly. Is there any advantage to being able to work with the administrators that you found in districts?
Yeah, I think a lot of administrators, this might sound weird if you're in the classroom. There's a lot of administrators that actually feel higher up they go, the less power they actually have. Right? Because they can feel more bound, they can feel like they're doing a lot more to protect you all. And I hear a lot of administrators say, like, I know I will be a much better administrator if, right? If I can get in the classrooms more, if I had more time to work hand on. And then I can't do it though, because unfortunately, I'm always dealing with behaviors and paperwork and whatever. And it comes to this thing where I'm like, okay, ask administrators, particularly from smaller schools, who is the leadership team in your building? Oh, it's just me and my AP. Who is the leadership team? Oh, it's just me and my AP. Oh, it's just me and my dean. It's just me. I'm like, no, stop. Who are the leaders in your building? I don't stop until they give me 10 names. But they start recognizing like there are people that lead without actual titles. And those are the people that are part of the team. Stop focusing on, like, if I'm talking to administrators right now, please stop giving so much weight and energy and time on people that are not buying in right away. Why would you start a movement with those people? You got to start the movement with the people that are already ready to move. And you create conditions that make it inevitable for folks to go along. And that's kind of like a different kind of energy. That's like evangelism. That's like, have you heard the good news? Have you heard the good news? All kids can learn.
Mm-hmm.
Even that kid. Like, really, that kid? Yeah, come to my class and see what that kid does in my class. And they're like, oh my goodness. And that's kind of where I think the bang for the buck with administrators can be very, very impactful, because once administrators start to truly believe in their power to create these revolutions and build these movements, it really changes the trajectory of what's possible. Because teachers can think that all day. What an administrator can do that and influence an entire staff. Or a district administrator could influence an entire district. Could be on that page. It really starts to create exponential impact in education, and we need exponents. We need exponential improvement in what we're doing.
Man, you've got Katie. Katie's going to be pulling this clip and just playing it over to you're speaking her language there, Colin, for sure. I could watch her in the lower part of my screen, just getting more and more excited as you were saying it. You were speaking her language for sure, and that's one of the things to brag on her for just a minute. When you started talking about who are your leaders, and I was thinking she could rattle off all the people in the building that are leaders, and that's a testament to the leaders in our building for sure. But it's also a testament to her and the way she utilizes the people that are around her. Hey, one of the ways that we always end the podcast is we talk about like what's one thing you want people to walk away knowing out of all the stuff we talked about. If there's one thing you want people to walk away knowing, I'm going to give you a second to think about that. Katie is going to have to answer first, and then I'll kick it to you, and then I'll finish us out and end up the podcast. All right.
Yeah. And then Colin, when you please share how to get connected with you too. We'll put it out on the information, but also for people that are actively listening right now.
All right, Katie, what do you want people to walk away with now?
Colin, anytime you're on something, I try to listen. I walk away. I feel like you have I walked away learning today, and I just want to share my learning right now. I love the switch into project-based learning into problem-based learning, because that breaks it down to a very actionable, manageable, tangible step for educators. I feel like I dream really big sometimes, and I think you just humbled me down a little bit to really think about actionable things, because we're really kind of doing some of this work in our building right now. Problem-based learning is something everybody can walk away and do every day. So that's my big takeaway. I also, the definitions and defining clarity. I think a lot of times when we talk behavior, this is a walkaway I think I'm going to talk to Justin more about. When we talk about a lot of these behavioral concepts and what we understand them to be, making sure everybody understands with clarity. If you're leading this work, I think that came away for me today. Also, I would encourage districts. I have heard Colin speak. He has come to our districts. Colin is a dynamic public speaker. As much as I hope you enjoyed him on this podcast. His energy is contagious. I connect with him on thinkLaw. Have him come out. This is the work when we talk about trauma-informed care. It is the academic and equity work with this of high expectations. If you want to shift behavior, I think what Colin is saying is a big part of the story in terms of getting kids behavioral shifts. This is the part we don't talk about a lot with trauma-informed care. This is the missing component. Academics are the other really big part in high expectations to help kids. So I just want to say can personally attest Colin Seale is worth to connect with for professional development in your district. Reach out to him at thinkLaw.
All right. Katie gave us 93 things
that
she wanted us to walk away knowing. Colin, let's see if you can do better. What's one thing you want to have people walk away knowing?
I want you to imagine a teaching profession where you can go to work 15, 20 minutes before work starts, leave 15, 20 minutes after work ends, and be done. And I want to bring this up because I feel like in teaching, there's like either you're a superstar, goes above and beyond the call of duty, or it's not good enough. That's not sustainable. Having been a lawyer, I'm like, that's not how we do things in the law, right? Like most lawyers are not superstars, but you have an assistant, you have a paralegal, you have a partner over you, have someone. So it's like, we got to really think about what it takes to create a thing where like, you don't need to be somebody who ends up sacrificing so much to the point where I don't know about you all, but I know so many colleagues that in their 30s, 40s started having health conditions that you really should only have in your 60s and 70s, right? I want to create a space where it does not create, it's not like this. And we do it because we've made it easy. We've made it easy. Like these things we've done, they shouldn't be an X factor. Let's define the X. Let's make it clear. What does it actually take? If you need support on how to create better hooks for kids to engage, then invest in making sure the teachers have those hooks and do it. Because we can't just act like we can keep on going along this path, seeing all these teachers getting burnt out, struggling to meet the basic needs of their kids and saying, well, we're just going to keep on looking for like rock star teachers. That's not a sustainable path. So keep on thinking about what it would take for an average person to work regular hours and still have amazing outcomes in this field. Our profession deserves that.
Yeah. That's so good. How can people, if they are looking to contact you, districts, other schools, things like that, how can they do that? What's the best way for them to do that?
Sure. If you go to our website, thinklaw.us, you can check out all of our offerings. We have a whole curriculum that uses real life legal cases and upper grades, fairy tales and nursery rhymes and lower grades. That's really popular for like advisories, homerooms, after school, summer school. So you can check that out. We've got our 2 different books. Thinking Like a Lawyer, second edition is coming out right here at the end of January. And Tangible Equity is always available as well. And if you wanted to just kind of go to our website, request a quote for any kind of speaking engagement, any kind of training with your teachers, we do so many things virtually, do things in person, we even do things with our parents and families since they often are looking for ways that they can support critical thinking at home with their kids. So yeah, we're really easy to reach. You can follow me on social media at Colin E. Seale on X, Colin Seale on Twitter. Follow thinkLaw at thinkLaw US at all the social media platforms. And yeah, just keep on following the work that we're doing. And yeah.
Well, Colin, I'm excited that you came on with us. It was really great. People should definitely reach out, look into more of Colin's stuff. I think there's one thing I wanted people to walk away knowing, remembering, it's maybe to remember that origin story. I love that you talked about that. I think that's an important thing that sometimes we forget. And we forget how we ended up where we ended up. It's something that I've thought about a lot for myself here recently, just for any number of reasons. And I think it's impactful, and it makes a big difference in how you go about your life and how you go about your job. I also just want to say, listen, like there are people, like we talked to various people, a lot of great guests that we've had on. I think that you do a really great job of expressing like the reality and conveying some of those actual issues that come up, but then conveying like what the solutions are to those. You have a real gift for that, and I'm excited that you're somebody that can go out and use that, and that you continue to do that. But you're on the right track. If you're out there listening, this guy's on the right track. So pay attention to what he's doing. Check out his stuff. Check out his other stuff. he knows what he's talking about. As always, Colin will have you hang on after we do sign off here just for a quick second. Everybody out there listening, we appreciate you as always, man. Share this with somebody. Share it with some administrators. I think that's maybe like another key takeaway. That's a big deal and might be something that's worth your district looking into. Share it with somebody that you want to have a conversation with more about it, and get the word out here. We always appreciate you. Like it. Give us a rating. And as always, let's go out there and do the work.
Let's go do it.
Hey, everybody, let's keep the conversation going.
Like and subscribe below and keep the comments rolling.